seen is we've seen that there have been recommendations made by the working group that will be voted on by the NCAA Board of Governors and could potentially go into effect in the academic year 2021-2022. And we also know that there are various state laws as well that are going into, that have been signed into law in a couple states and are pending in other states. So what we do know is that there is going to be some form of compensation for athletes based on their name, image, and likeness. Or rather, let me clarify, the opportunity for student athletes to be compensated for name, image, and likeness. And so while we don't know what the exact rules are going to be, we do know that compensation is coming. And we do know that there are going to be contracts that are going to be signed, et cetera. So the focus has to be at this point over the next, whatever it is, 15, 16 months, there has to be a very focused effort on the preparation and education of not just student athletes, but also athletic administrators as well and the administration staff. We know that there are going to be, when contracts are being signed, there's got to be just a general understanding of basic contracts and what does an endorsement contract or a marketing contract even look like, or should it look like? As Courtney is going to talk about, I'm sure, understanding the financial implications of all of this and how this comes together. Even just making brand decisions. There is a lot that's going to come with the potential for compensation, and education has to follow that. Or rather, education has to lead that.
Well, Courtney, he threw to you, so I have to put you on the spot. What are you thinking about this and the effect it's going to have?
I'll try to keep it to just a couple minutes so I let other people talk, because Luke knows I could talk about the education aspect all afternoon. But no question, I mean, even the work that we do now with student athletes, whether it be in individual schools or at the elite athlete symposiums at the NCAA, we find that in as much as some of them are studying finance in college, all programs do the best they can to try to get the student athletes educated financially. The piece that's missing is, most important piece that's missing is practicality. The other piece is they need relatable information. They need relatable educators. They need relatable situations. So we see now, if it's a Power 5 football team where most student athletes on that team are full scholarship student athletes, getting cost of attendance money, sometimes Pell Grant, they have several tattoos. They have apartments that they are forgetting to pay rent for. They are being rendered ineligible at the beginning of a season because their parking ticket balance has risen so high that they haven't paid their balance, so they're not eligible for classes. That small little sliver of the population, and quite frankly, much smaller sliver of what money they may be available to make, is what we see now. So we take that and we say, okay, we're now going to be looking at student athletes potentially wanting to receive compensation for their name, image, and likeness at all levels, D3. So we know that those student athletes that we work with, they've needed extra preparation just on the budgeting piece. So we know that they're all going to need it. And they need it because no coach, no athletic director wants the student athletes to be distracted from the most important pieces of their life: being healthy, being a high-performing academic student, and a high-performing athlete. And the minute you start throwing in all these other aspects, they can get distracted very quickly. And all of these athletic departments have the students' best interest in mind. So we try to do what we can. We want them to get educated. And as Luke said, the staff, they're in a place where this is brand new. They don't know what they don't know. So I think there needs to be a fair amount of education for staff as well, so they're able to help these student athletes the best that they can.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, Joshua, I'd love to get your take. You know, you, of course, as a student athlete, did this cross your mind that you would have liked to have gotten financial compensation? And if you were in this scenario now and you were faced with this happening, what would be your thought process?
No, I mean, I thought about that all the time. That was something that I was even active on Twitter when I was playing about it. And just the opportunity, I think, is what is really appealing. And I was at Ohio State during a really successful time. We won 50 games, only lost 4 while I was there. We won a national title we had guys on the cover of Sports Illustrated, just as popular as could be. And it's not necessarily the opportunity to go out there and, make $100,000 doing commercials and everything. It would have been the opportunity to go out there and sign autographs after a national championship season and make a few $1,000s and feel good about yourself. So that's kind of been the back of my mind. I'm glad it's an opportunity now, but I think the first thing that comes to mind from the student athlete perspective is how can we protect these young men? And what I mean by that, like you said, there are a ton of pitfalls. Do you get distracted from your sport because you don't have your financial house in order? Are you able to understand the deals that you're entering into and the position that you're going to be in? Can you creatively build a brand for yourself too? And I think that's part of protecting these guys is protecting their image and protecting their brand too, and really understanding how to manage that and handle that. So for me, I think it's great. I think it's an awesome opportunity. I personally don't believe there is as much money in it as people believe there is, but somebody can go out there and make a boatload of money. I think it's fantastic. It's just how can we make sure that, budgets are made, taxes are paid, and guys are still able to go in, focus on their schooling, focus on going out there Saturdays, whatever day they're playing basketball games, making plays and continuing to grow that brand into a place where if they do become a professional, or even if they don't, their brand is still profitable for them because of the groundwork that was laid in college.
You said the word paying taxes, and I remember my first job, and I had the W-2 to fill out. I had no idea what I was supposed to put there, what the numbers meant. I was not under the pressure of being a student athlete. So Luke, how on earth are student athletes supposed to know how they were going to do this? And especially if it's something that they need to pursue advisement on their own and it's not part of the athletic department.
Yeah, there has to be a focus on athletes really understanding this. I mean, here's one of the challenges. The challenge is that we talk about, an athlete being the CEO of their company, right? The CEO of their brand around them. But what are we doing to empower them to be that CEO, to know what that means and to know how to manage these things? So, to Joshua's point, when you look at a contract, an endorsement contract, you're going to get what's called 1099 income. They're not withholding any taxes. They're going to send you full payment of whatever it is that they said that they're going to pay you. If they say you're going to get paid $2,500, you're going to get a check for $2,500. It's going to be up to you based on your income to make sure that you're saving the requisite amount of money to be able to pay your taxes when the tax bill comes. Because guess what? The tax bill always comes, right? And I think that's what we all kind of learn at some point in life. And, I've had situations with, to your point, Nicole, like I've had situations with pro athletes who have asked about, well, even just with their wages, their earnings from their team, understanding like the breakdown of like, well, who's FICA? Well, there's a long story behind that, right? Like, and truly understanding like what all this money that comes out. It's important that they get that. And here's the thing, we can't just believe that their marketing agent, marketing advisor, or whoever that person is that's finding them deals is actually going to be educating them on that aspect of things, right? You would hope that they would, but this is where the education comes in. And I do think, and I know we'll probably talk about this throughout the hour, but this education is going to have to be a holistic approach. There's going to have to be, the athletic administration is going to have to focus on some of the education. It's going to be, independent professionals who do this work. And it's also going to be, the athlete taking the lead on, well, what classes could I take to help me understand if I really am going to be an entrepreneur where I own my business now, what does that look like? Maybe I should take an entrepreneurship class that's offered. And maybe athletic departments are going to be working with academics to say, hey, could we put together a series of courses for for athletes who might be compensated based on name, image, and likeness to understand things like basics of contracts, financial management, taxes, etc. I think it's going to have to be a holistic approach. Otherwise, we will see players who either get taken advantage of or who make decisions that really aren't in their best interest, and it comes back to bite them down the road. Nicole, you're muted.
Courtney, maybe you could speak to that. My dog's here, and I'm afraid he was going to start to bark. So. I've been reading up, of course, on the Zion Williams case, and it brings to mind when you have a professional athlete and they get involved in signing deals financially, they've proven themselves to be good enough to be a professional athlete. Whereas you have other, when you're in college, your athletic ability can change so dramatically. I mean, Joe Burrow, what a perfect example. And Zion Williams is, at his age, he signs a deal, he ends up reneging on that deal. And I don't know all the details. Obviously, I don't know exactly what happened, but now he's facing a $100 million lawsuit. I mean, how do we prepare people who are 18, 19, 20 years old? We know that the prefrontal cortex development doesn't end until you're 25, to be making decisions that could have lifelong ramifications to them.
It's a very difficult process, I think. And I think that it's also an incredibly exciting process. I think that we have a unique opportunity right now to come in. It'll be 2021 at some point when name, image, and likeness starts. It'll be on the heels, hopefully, of this pandemic. Budgets are going to be down. Student athletes are going to be disoriented, coming back into what their new normal is, whatever that looks like. And morale is going to be low. Morale is low now. So these schools and conferences have an opportunity to make this great. And I do think, as Luke said, they have to take the holistic approach to education. And we're talking about schools with varying budgets, and budgets that are today that may be 2/3 of what they are today next year. But I think first and foremost, everybody needs to be focused on education and understand that whatever resources they need, A, they have to define the resources, and B, they need to access them, and the resources will be out there. And I think, one thing that Luke does so well that we try to do at TeamAltemus is teach concepts that they can apply to all areas of their life. So it's not that we expect them to come in and do a couple of workshops and be financial experts or know how to read contracts. It's a process that they generally usually already use. They may need to tweak it because they have to apply it a little differently off the field. And they learn to slow the thought process down, to be methodical in whatever they're looking at, whether it's an opportunity to make money, it's a brainstorming session to decide if they even want to participate in name, image, and likeness, making scheduling decisions, understanding they don't know what they don't know about money, whether it's taxes or budgeting, or, some of them will make enough money for investing. Some of them in the Olympic sports will be trying to make enough money to bridge that gap between their partial scholarship and what's coming out of their pocket. Many of these student athletes are going to come into this with family members who have historically financially supported them, who are out of jobs because of our situation right now. So it's a critical time. And I think how they do it, Nicole, really is focusing on that holistic piece and keeping it simple. Luke and I love acronyms. And I don't want to oversimplify, but I've been thinking about it sort of, what are the core components that they need, whether it's for branding or scheduling or learning about advisors. I mean, it's DDMC, it's decision-making, it's due diligence, it's money and contracts. And if they can learn some tenets of decision-making, that's going to help them across the board. Due diligence, all of these people are going to be coming at them. I'm sure Joshua can relate. Pick me. Did you know you needed an insurance salesperson? Did you know you needed a brand manager? They need to understand who those people are, and if they need them for their own personal situation, and then how to choose them. And then money and contracts will run throughout as well. So there are very accessible ways to get this information to both the staff and the athletes. And I think the key is to keep it simple and keep it to processes that they can apply in other areas of life, including in the classroom and on the field. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to develop them as human beings, not just athletes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Luke.
I just want to jump in real quick, because you brought up the Zion Williamson lawsuit, and I think that is such a study, an opportunity to really understand this process just in its totality and the need for education. So without going into all the details, because it is somewhat of a complex lawsuit and counter lawsuit, but when you look at the complaints and the filings, you actually can see the contract that he signed, right? And one of the things that I look at is he signed this contract, and there's a termination provision in there. When you look at the termination provision, which is how do I get out of this contract? What it said was that he was locked into the contract for 5 years. First of all, that's entirely too long. I mean, way too long, right? We work with pro athletes, and we'll negotiate the shortest. Sometimes it's usually days that it takes for someone to provide notice to get out of a contract. But what makes it even worse then is that after that 5 years, he can only get out of that contract for cause, right? So he would have to find something egregious that the marketing advisor, the marketing agent did in order to use that to get out of the contract. So this is a contract that he signed that he's now locked into, right, forever, which, then he breaks the contract and therefore, sues to get out of it because he can't just provide notice to get out of it. He sues to get out of it. They countersue saying that he breached the contract. This is the type of education that athletes need to understand. So if you can imagine Zion Williamson, who everyone would have agreed that last year he was probably the biggest named college athlete in all of sports, right? And if he's signing a contract and doesn't necessarily have the people around him to help recognize that provision that's in the contract, you can only imagine what someone who's maybe signing a $5,000 endorsement deal or something with a local marketing agent, what they don't understand. So while we're not here to make student athletes sports lawyers, because then ultimately at some point I might be out of a job, but we're here to educate them, right? We're here to educate to make sure that they understand the questions to ask. If I know that I should look at the termination provision, then I can understand. One question I could ask when I'm interviewing someone is, how long would it take for me to get out of this contract if we don't build a strong relationship, right? If I understand, the term of the contract, like how long am I tied into it? How do I get out of it, right? How much do I pay you? When I understand kind of those basics, contract, provisions, then I can ask the right questions to hopefully get me to the right place and sign an agreement that at least gives me some protections to be able to get out of it if I need to.
Well, Joshua, can you help us understand from your experience kind of who are the people that were in play when you were on the precipice of making money? Like, and where does that come in? And, we have a lot of people who are asking questions about, should the athletic department provide financial managers to aid with this? I mean, what was the assistance you got from your athletic department, and how did you determine who was going to be on your team?
Sure. So, when I was leaving college, we had a panel discussion, basically a summit that the athletic department had sponsored, and they talked about agents. And one of the beautiful things about the NFL and many of the other professional sports leagues is that agents, financial advisors, et cetera, have to be registered through the Players Association. And I know this is a situation for student athletes where they're not able to organize and unionize, but that was one of the major benefits as a rookie coming into the NFL of the NFLPA, was automatically you had that layer of protection of vetted professionals that are used to working with people in a similar position that can help you. But for me, my team first consisted of an agent, and I interviewed numerous agents. And I'm very thankful that my mom and dad were able to put input into that selection process. My dad has been very successful in business, so he understands how to navigate those waters, and nobody knows their son like a mother does. So it's good to have her sitting there to give me advice. After that, I went with a financial advisor. That was the second person I wanted to add to my team. And I'll say this. I had the agency I signed with had a contract agent, and then they had a marketing agent as well. So that was all under one umbrella, which I appreciated. It made it really easy to get those deals done. There was a lot of communication. There were never conflicts in scheduling, all that kind of stuff, which was helpful. Some people may prefer to do it a different way. The financial advisor came second, and I wanted my financial advisor and my agent to not know each other at all. And I wanted to keep those two things separate because I did not want a conflict of interest with anything pertaining to my athletic career or my finances. Two very important things to me. And then the same thing was with my tax accountant. I wanted somebody who was going to be able to have some oversight over both my agent who advises my contracts and deals with money on that end, and my financial advisor who advises me on investments and how, where my money is coming in and where it's going and all those types of things. I wanted an accountant who was completely independent, didn't know either of the first two groups, to be able to advise me that way. Now for student athletes, I feel like this situation becomes very different. Agents, you don't necessarily pay them up front, but they cost money. financial advisors will take a percentage of your portfolio, and they will charge you for consulting fees, even if it's for budgeting, etc. A lot of these firms will. And then when you're talking about accountants, obviously, they'll charge you $500 upwards of, $2,500 or more to file your taxes every year, which is going to be important, like we said, for folks who are receiving 1099s for their filings. So I think that the athletic departments don't have a responsibility to necessarily provide these tools and these structures, but they definitely have a responsibility on advising the due diligence process. And I love how you said that. Because I sell real estate. Part of real estate transactions is due diligence, but I am not an inspector. I am not a lender. I am not an escrow company. I don't do any of those things, but I can advise my clients on professionals who I know who are responsible and get the job done properly, that they could interview to become a lender or to become a real estate lawyer or to become a home inspector. And so that needs to be the role of the athletic department in this equation for me, is be a resource and a tool for these young men who have never experienced this before to come to you and say, where do I start? What do you recommend? And then let them make decisions and draw conclusions for themselves based off of that.
I mean, we have some criticisms in here that are valid, which is Sean points out that the educational system doesn't do the best job necessarily teaching personal finance to anyone, let alone student athletes. So, it's bad enough when you're, me who made $14,000 a year at my first job coming out of college versus someone who could really be making some significant money. So if we're not sure about who's going to be the right person to be doing this, and I go back, I had the great fortune of having Cardell Jones with a group of students, and he'll never live down that I didn't come here to play school. So if you have student athletes who are saying, like, I didn't come here to play school, whether they say it out loud or not, saying to them, look, we want you to take personal finance classes and marketing classes for yourself, and they're going to be like, I didn't come here for any of that. How are we going to compel this kind of accountability? I mean, Joshua, I think you're extraordinary for so many reasons, and I think you just expressed, the preparation that you made may not have been completely extraordinary, but it certainly was preparation that some people may not have the advantage of having mom and dad to be there to show them the way. So how do we get that message out to all of our people who are facing this kind of opportunity that can really be enticing?
Well,
I think that's tough. I mean, it's a heck of a place to start, but I feel like in these situations, first off, from the top down, there needs to be a directive from the NCAA, and I think there needs to be a lot of clarity there. That's where it starts. But each individual university, I think, will understand its athletic department situation best, and I think that's where the next level of planning has to come. But I'm a person who believes in responsibility and personal accountability for each of these student athletes. And if it's me and it's my career I'm looking at and I'm evaluating, and I've got thousands of dollars, potentially hundreds of thousands, depending on what the player is, that might be in the balance. I'm going to seek the resources that are necessary. And I know not everybody is built like that, but there has to be that kind of back and forth between athletic departments. And this is why athletic departments need to be invested. Somebody said it earlier. I believe it's true. But these guys cannot do what they came to school to do properly if the athletic department is not invested in them, making sure that they have their ducks in a row off the field. It's why they send these guys to tutoring. It's why they help these guys understand how to pay their rent and how to set up utilities when they move off campus. It's why they make sure that everybody has a meal plan with it laid out exactly what they're going to eat and when they're going to eat it. It's so they can go to class and they can come into the facility and work out and practice and then go out there and perform. So I think that's kind of where the starting point has to be.
What do you think, Courtney?
I agree. And, as I said earlier, every athletic program does what they can do around it. And I think that this is going to demand an exponential increase in across the board education. And, Joshua, you are incredibly unique, I have to tell you. Your approach to it, your sound-mindedness about how you chose your advising team, I mean, amazing. And I wish every student athlete was like you, whether they're going to play professional sports or not. Because at the end of the day, we want all these student athletes to be hireable wherever they go.
Right.
And, you know, there's no athletic director that's going to tell you otherwise. That's why they're in this line of work. But in order for them to be hireable, they need to understand that there are these processes. How many of them know the words due diligence? How many of them know what questions to ask? I mean, when we run a due diligence workshop, we get the student athletes in mock interviews. And our goal is to try to help them have more confidence in their own knowledge. So once they learn due diligence, they can continue to apply it in other areas when they go to buy real estate, in Joshua's example. I think that the athletic departments are, you know, their interests are aligned, not just because of that distraction factor. You know, look, they want the student athletes to be, number one, obeying the rules. And then they want them to be healthy and performing well in the classroom and on the field, on the court, in their sport. And they can, I said it earlier, they can make this a situation where they can really help these student athletes shine coming out of a tremendously difficult time in our country in sports, where sports is the place everybody comes together. Or, you know, they can really not do what they need to do. And it could be, Reggie Bush said it the other day, I'm not sure which word he used, but disastrous. And it's true. It's really, and I think, Nicole, to the point of, I think you said it was Sean talking about how, you know, there's not enough education for everybody in this space. It's true. And what these students need at their ages, with their lack of developed prefrontal cortex, people they can relate to. They need practical lessons. So I think it's not as overwhelming as it may sound, but it has to be addressed. And it's a difficult time because budgets are getting crushed.
So I got to jump in on this, right? Because I'm literally sitting on the edge of my seat because I love this stuff. And for you guys who know me, like if we were in person, I would be up like walking around right now. Because this is it, right? This is what we're talking about. And when you think about it, I honestly think that coaches are going to play a role in pushing the education and the development in this space, because it comes back to recruiting. So if I'm a coach and I'm going to recruit high school players, I'm sitting down with that player and their family, right, in their living room, and name, image, and likeness is now on this, you know, we're on the precipice of seeing this come into reality. I'm going to talk to them about my understanding and knowledge of the corporate environment in the city in which we're recruiting to. We're going to talk about how we've started to put in place academic coursework that can help to develop them in various aspects, right? I'm going to have conversations around what our compliance department is doing beyond just the enforcement piece, but really looking at how to help prepare and educate, right? Looking at the outside experts that we're bringing in. We're doing all of these things to make sure that if you come to our school, we're going to make sure that you are prepared so that you don't get taken advantage of. And whether you're the elite of the elite athlete or not, we're going to make sure that you still don't get taken advantage of, whether you're signing some $100,000 endorsement deal or a $5,000, $1,000 appearance fee, right? We're going to make sure that you're prepared. And when you think about how you put all of that stuff together, I think the coaches are going to be a driving force in making that happen, because it's going to help them to recruit the best of the best. And ultimately, you know, however you decide to look at it, that's going to be, you know, that's going to be an important piece of this. The other important piece to remember, and I want to take a step back, because we've talked so much about the endorsement side of these rule changes, but there's another piece, which is really the entrepreneurship piece, which says, hey, so just like non-athlete students, if you want to start a business, you'll be able to start a business, right? Now that brings with it a whole other set of due diligence, word of the day, due diligence issues that we can talk about later, but there's still an aspect of, hey, if I'm recruiting someone and maybe they've started a clothing line in high school, or they've started some various, you know, entrepreneurial opportunity, what are we then doing as a school to help prepare them so that they can understand, right, how to be educated in being an entrepreneur? What type of, you know, do we have any incubators? Do we have, you know, mentorship programs, etc.? So that, hey, you know what, whether you go play professional sports or not, if you have this entrepreneurial idea and you come to our school, we're going to make sure that you're prepared so that when you do leave school, you have gotten 4 years or whatever it is of developing in this business, learning from the best of the best, utilizing our networks. So from my perspective, when you're able to talk about that aspect of education from a recruiting perspective, I absolutely think that we're going to see this coordination start to come together.
If we could maybe talk a little bit about the NCAA role in this. You know, they loom so large, and I think there's some level of misunderstanding about what the NCAA controls and you know, the schools and the kind of the relationship between the student athlete and the NCAA. You know, we've only heard about ways in which student athletes have violated rules that get them in trouble with the NCAA, and this seems ripe for boosters to come into the picture in ways that are not going to be sound, you know, not going to be good for anyone. There's rules about managerial teams and agents and being involved with all these different pieces when you're still a student athlete. How is all of this going to be reconciled in time for this to take effect? Luke?
Yeah.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I'll give you my perspective. I think there's a couple aspects to your question. One is the agent, the marketing agent, that aspect side of things. I think we've started to see, you know, through the NCAA as it relates to basketball, we've started to see, you know, the whole idea that they can have, you can be a student athlete, and as long as you sign with one of these agents that's gone through their process that's certified, you won't lose your eligibility if you decide to test the waters for the NBA and decide to come back to school, as long as you follow the certain guidelines. So I think the NCAA is starting to get comfortable with what that looks like, and I think that there's going to be some lessons that can be pulled from that in terms of, if you're going to be a marketing agent for a player, for a student athlete, that you've got to be, you know, go through the certification process with the NCAA. And to Joshua's earlier point, that kind of starts looking like what it does for the CBA, you know, the agreements that financial advisors and agents have to go through in the professional league unions. You know, the other aspect I think to all of this is, you know, how do we help, you know, how does the NCAA help its member institutions be effective in all of this, right? And that's a tough question. I mean, I really don't have the answer. What we've seen is some conversation around there might be this national registry, right, or a clearinghouse. But that complete clearinghouse, it seems like it would be more on the compliance side of things, to try to help make sure that there aren't those impermissible benefits, that a booster does, you know, pays $100,000 for somebody to do a social media marketing thing when they only have, you know, 100 followers on Twitter or what have you, right? Something that's so clearly outside of the scope of what's normal. But that's going to be a really hard space to be in, right? So on our end, we see at the professional level, we see pro athletes and the contracts, the marketing agreements, the marketing contracts that they sign. And so we can look at one pretty quickly and say, yep, this is market, this isn't market, this is normal, this is outside of the bounds, and you should negotiate these aspects. To do that at the collegiate level, it's going to be critical from a compliance perspective, which is what I think the NCAA is looking at. But just as important, it's going to be important for the athlete themselves to know what their value is. How do you, as an 18, 19-year-old just coming into sports, you know, really understand, just coming into college sports, understand what your value is? And so there's going to be a role for that as well. And I do think that there are going to be opportunities where athletic administrators are going to have to work with the student athletes to help them understand, hey, coming in, and let's use football, where we know there can be a few years, or even basketball, women's basketball, right, where you can't go to the WNBA, you know, right out of high school. You have to be there, you know, 4 years post. So during those years, maybe you can develop that, right? You can develop that brand, you can develop that market value, so that maybe down the road your value is even higher. So there's going to be a lot of conversations that come from that, and I truly believe athletic administrators are going to have to work with outside resources who do see this on a regular basis, so that they just have the understanding, the knowledge to best educate those athletes going through it.
Luke, I want to jump in on a couple of those things too, because that last point you made about the potential WNBA player, for example, I think kind of lost in all of this is the long-term effect of rules like this, where you can build a brand over 4 or 5 years, and, you know, people start to recognize you on social media. It's like the specialists at Ohio State, the kickers are always doing kind of crazy stuff, but over time they build up a brand to where they have marketability, and whether or not they become a professional athlete, people will be able to recognize them off of that brand. That opens them up to other opportunities. But kind of going back to what you originally said, first off, I think that the NCAA would probably have a good opportunity to do, like you said, they do in the professional leagues, In the NFL, we had a standard representation agreement. So essentially your agent would bring you an agreement. It had fillable lines in it. They would fill what their representation fee was, and they would fill the term that you were represented by them in there. In real estate, we have a similar thing. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't write contracts on behalf of my clients. So we have a standardized contract. It's fillable. There are numerous sections. They all address the different aspects. There could be something like that for your run-of-the-mill typical endorsement deals that would happen between business and a student athlete. And I think having a standardized form would definitely clarify a lot of the issues, but it would also be something with built-in protection for a student athlete. It's a simple form. They all read the same. You know which lines you have to look at. There's going to be a line for, termination. There's going to be a line for compensation, all those different things. And it would really help in that situation. And so I think that's kind of, if we had to pick a place to be, if you're the NCAA, is maybe you do it regionally because the markets are going to be different from region to region. Obviously the state and local laws are going to be different, but is there a way that they could create a contract that is basically a template that's fillable on both ends for the student athlete and for businesses that would maybe streamline the process? And it would avoid, for a lot of these student athletes, potential agent fees. Because, if you're making $500 and somebody's charging you 20% for a marketing fee off of that, I mean, what are we doing at that point? Just, have something where they can go themselves. They can keep more money in their pocket. That makes sense.
Well, I think just to touch back on that, Joshua, I think a standardized form for the marketing agent themselves and the agent agreement to the player, hands down, absolutely. I think there would be such benefit from the NCAA doing that. As it relates to the endorsement deals, because just to take a step back, that's how we can make sure that, no marketing agent should be able to have a long-term agreement with a college athlete, right? Like the college athlete, they should maintain their empoweredness, right? And their empowerment to be able to say, hey, if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, I should be able to terminate you when I want to terminate you. And at worst, terminate you by the end of this academic year or what have you, right? And so having a standardized form could help with that, right? To your point about the endorsement deals, I think there's something there, right? I think there's some value to come with that, because there are certain types of marketing opportunities that we see regularly, right? You've got apparel, you've got appearances, right? You've got playing cards, and then you've got other types of social media marketing, right? If you use those as kind of like the four different buckets, if you will, you could easily create some standardized forms with standardized language that then, like you said, gets filled in, similar to SRA or, SBAC in basketball. I think there are some opportunities for that. And there are going to be some things that are outside the bounds, right? And those might have to be the one-offs that get looked at, but usually those are going to be with someone that probably has higher marketability, right? And they can afford then to have, someone, look at those more specifically. But I do think that there's going to be value if that were to happen. The question is whether the NCAA wants to be in that position of, right, hiring someone to put those together, and any potential liability that could come from them creating this standardized form.
Yeah, I think the liability aspect is probably the thing that's most off-putting to universities and the NCAA just overall when it comes to being in an advisory mode. And it's, again, we're in a litigious society. You obviously know that. And it's the same thing. Like, I keep drawing these parallels to my industry, but I'm very careful in how I advise my clients because I'm not an attorney and I don't want to give them bad advice. And so my favorite line is, find an attorney who can help you out if you have legal questions, because that's outside of my realm of possibility. But I think those are legitimate concerns. I would just love to see, like you said, for example, some of these deals are so similar that you might not want to spend the money on an attorney or on representation. You might just want to be able to go in as a student athlete, empowered with the knowledge of your market to be able to say, hey, this is what I think I'm worth on this deal. Let's get it done.
So we have several questions coming in about the age at which we should be doing this. We've been talking collegiate, and we've been talking fairly high-profile collegiate athletes. But when I was in high school, I had professional skateboarders at my school. I'm from California. Professional skateboarders, professional surfers, coming in at 7th grade. So now that we know that recruiting takes place at 7th grade, and that's when the compliance process kind of kicks into gear, should we be educating kids in middle school about this? How would we kind of manage it at that level? Gosh, Courtney, I'm going to help me here. Help me understand.
I'm nodding my head. Early and often is the answer. We can't start early enough. And it's been difficult with the NCAA regulations to date because of the rule, which the name I'm going to forget, but the rule that basically wants to make sure that there are not people on high school campuses recruiting for any particular individual college. So if we go down and, you know, do a session with University of Georgia football, we can't have just come from, you know, the local high school, even if we were volunteering to talk about money, because there is a possibility that we could have been, you know, getting something to funnel some kids to any school. So we have not to date been pursuing educating anybody younger than student athletes at colleges because of that. I think it is so critical. And I think, you know, you already see it with basketball. Any young man who's going to be a one and done is on campus for 7 months. They come in with their team around them. It's very hard to penetrate that team. It's very hard to educate because they're there for a very specific purpose, and then they're off to the draft. So really we need to get to them sooner and get to their family sooner, and anybody that they're seeking counsel from. And, you know, that could be in the form of education at some of these AAU league levels, at some of the, you know, the sponsors who run these camps. I would think that, you know, they would want to be all over this. It's only going to help their brand and their image if they're helping families get educated sooner. I think, you know, it's like you said, the professional skateboarder or surfer, the child actor, you know, we know all the horror stories, and there are actually people, you know, like us, like Luke, who want to help make sure that those stories go away. We want all the stories to be positive. And the only way to do that is to give them the tools. You can tell them the horror stories all day long, but if you don't tell them how to avoid the pitfalls, it's not going to happen. And, you know, I would think too that in terms of, you know, sort of, if you look at kind of sports and society in general, in that intersection and the numbers, some of Ken Shropshire's work that he's done in and around studying the influence of sports on our society, and most importantly, that next generation, we really want more positive stories in the news. We want to be teaching them right from the beginning. And I think, again, I always like to look on the positive side, but I really do think that this name, image, and likeness shift with the NCAA can have a tremendous positive impact in much younger students, can give them more hope about goals, can teach them how to set goals and what they need to do to go after them.
It does feel like, though, I'm looking at the questions here, and we have so many people that are concerned about a lack of fairness, that the university is going to be out to get its cut in some way, that the agents are going to be out to get their cut, that the lawyers are going to be out to get their cut, that the, you know, whatever team you put in place is now out to manipulate student athletes, that, you know, someone's asking whether or not money should be put into a trust at the university level until students graduate. But then there's concern that maybe somehow the university could manipulate that in some way. And then, you know, Joshua, you mentioned the NFLPA providing protection. Is there a national role for the National College Players Association? You know, there just seems like there's so much mistrust. How can we get past that to really have a purity of benefit if the concern seems to be so deep here?
It needs to be from third-party experts. All those concerns are incredibly valid, and they're going to continue to be valid as long as the same organizations are involved on multiple sides. Even, you know, Joshua, you mentioned the NFLPA and the approved list. You know, that financial advisor approved list, they've had so many problems with it, from, you know, the 60 Minutes segment that was done to talk about Jeff Rubin and all the money he stole. And they dug into that list and they found out that there were a few people still approved, but they had been deceased for 2 years. So they've now said, not only do all advisors have to be CFPs, but we're now adding firms. So they have, I think it's Goldman and maybe Bessemer, who are approved firms. So you can see that they are trying more and more to relieve themselves of the liability. If something happens with one of those Goldman financial advisors, it's on Goldman. It's not on the NFLPA. So the more we can bring in objective experts, and of course, you know, it's easy for me to talk about because it's why I started my business. I was on Wall Street for a couple decades. I worked with professional athletes, and I realized the best way to help them was to stop managing their money and stop selling things and guide them. So, you know, there are those of us like Luke's group who do this, and, you know, it needs to be people who don't have skin in the game on either side. And it's a new concept. I mean, I will say when we started the business, my business partner, Rashad, will laugh because I say it all the time. We've never had a bad meeting. Nobody ever says, yeah, I'm not sure that's going to work. Mm-hmm. But, oh, wait, but we have to pay for the objective advice? It's new, but it's really, really important.
That skin in the game thing, I think, is a very interesting comment because I feel like you're 100% spot on. Is when you have third parties that are involved, they're going to do better to advocate on behalf of whatever they're supposed to advocate on behalf of, because there's nothing tying them to one side or the other. But I think there is, and it is, again, this personal responsibility thing I keep talking about. Like, there's a personal responsibility for athletes, whoever involved, to acknowledge, like, yes, your agent is in there to make a cut. Like, they're invested in making money. They didn't get into being an agent for charity. The same way that you're not going to sign a deal with a car dealership just to be nice and not make any money or not to have a loaner to drive. And so I think understanding in this whole ecosystem, like, part of my personal business today is the fact that I feel like I get to help people, but I also walk away after a transaction with a check. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not there to help, but some people in my industry are there for the check and not there to help people. And so part of our education that we've been talking about, I think, is absolutely evaluating those people and the right questions to ask them to make sure that when you need representation, because there's going to come a point, can you dig deep and really ask people where their motives lie and truly try to uncover why they want to work with you? Do they think you're a cash cow and that you're really profitable? Or do they want to make sure that they can structure really good deals that help everybody get paid and everybody's happy at the end of it?
Joshua, you had a really interesting point earlier when we were talking offline about that instead of cash payment, that you received merchandise. And it really got me thinking, and we've had some questions here about, student athletes that maybe are not at the highest level of earning potential. But let's say, we have an Olympic athlete and they're being asked to promote something locally, and that company says, oh, we're going to give you a bunch of our, logo merchandise, and we're going to give you all of this stuff in kind of contribution to you. And in turn, you're going to wear our stuff, and that's going to be the agreement that we have. And then you mentioned that suddenly that you realize you have to pay taxes on those things. And so, it's one thing to be thinking about the student athlete that has the potential to make, 5 or 6 figures. But what about the student athlete that, has the potential to make, $600, which is not the cutoff, I believe, for taxes. When we're getting into that kind of level of understanding, is it the same for all levels of student athletes, or how do we kind of delineate what education needs to be done where?
So the toughest part about, I think, the education aspect is it's not in practice a one size fits all type of situation. Even for, like the high level earner, for example, some guys are going to want somebody, and gals are going to want people that will be able to hold their hand throughout every step of the way. And then there are other folks who are like, hey, I want to learn along with this, but I want to be able to kind of jump in there on my own and be able to call my own shot without somebody holding my hand the whole time. So I think that's part of the deal. But again, the education, I think, at the beginning is a baseline of, kind of everybody's doing the same thing. But as athletic departments, and, we talked about this liability thing, but they're probably going to know more so where they have to focus their education. If you're a campus that is primarily Olympic sport athletes, that would be in a situation where maybe they would be in line for a certain dollar amount of apparel or a certain dollar amount of supplements from a company, but not necessarily the cash. I think you would be able to tailor your approach to education to benefit that. If you're in a place like Ohio State, it's probably a little bit of a tougher job because you're going to have the guys who, they might make a couple grand signing some autographs. Somebody's going to want to give them T-shirts, and then they'll be eating free, at Jersey Mike's every day. And then you're going to have the guy who, starting quarterback, he's going to be driving around a loaner car. He's probably going to be doing a commercial for X, Y, and Z company, and he's going to be, everything, right? So I think just having that awareness about kind of the makeup of your student athletes in kind of your athletic department would help guide where the education should go. But in the beginning, I think everything kind of needs to start with, you're going to have to pay taxes. You're going to have to create a budget. You're going to have to understand this language here, there, whatever, and then go from there.
You have to. I got to jump in on that because I think Joshua's point is so valid. You have to be able to provide the blanket general education. And as coaches, directors of player development, and other administrators start to see how their team, the types of deals that people from their teams are receiving and things like that, then you can become even more specialized, right? Because that'll become a part of recruiting, and you want to make sure that you're preparing these athletes to be protected during that aspect. Because again, we're talking mostly like these big deals, big opportunities, Power 5 schools, etc. But what if you're talking about D2, D3, right? There very well may still be opportunities for them to be compensated in their local areas, wherever they are, from local businesses, local companies who want to continue to support and have some of these athletes be involved and engaged. So from that perspective, you have to start generally, and then you can specialize based on sport, based on opportunities that you've typically seen. But I will also say this back to the previous question. This education is not going to be solely an NCAA issue. This has to go back to the high school level, right? To your point about surfers and skateboarders, whether you're talking about, so many different sports, we're going to have to look at what our high school athletic association is doing, number one, in terms of preparing their student athletes as they transition to college, but two, are their rules going to change, right? Because right now, most high school athletic associations mirror NCAA rules that say you can't be compensated, outside of, anything that's impermissible. And so from that perspective, our high school athletic association is going to change the rules. And then does that lead to interesting recruiting, i.e. moving, et cetera, at the high school level, state to state, depending on what state rules end up going into place. And when you think about that, like, now we're talking also AAU coaches, right? AAU from a basketball perspective and other sports as well is very big. So this education isn't going to be something that I think we're talking about here that's just solely NCAA or solely the member institutions. It's something that's going to have to live at all different levels.
So Joshua, so we have someone who's eager to get address the idea of video games and the fact that they've been taken off the table. And does that compromise our ability to, as a public, to trust the decisions that are being made on behalf of student athletes? As a former student athlete, how would you answer that?
Well, I think the video game becomes extremely complicated. First off, there's so many schools. So you would have to divide the money between all those schools and then the depth of their roster, which becomes tough. And that's exactly what they do in the NFL. Tom Brady made the same amount of money off of Madden that I made when I was playing in the NFL. And part of that is because the union was able to collectively bargain for that compensation based off of the video game. And in the ecosystem that's going to be coming up, there is not going to be an opportunity thus far for student athletes to unionize and to be able to advocate on how a deal like that would be structured and distributed among all of their members. So I think that's probably the first problem. But to get to the bottom of that question, yeah, I think you can still trust the NCAA. Thus far, they're doing the things that we've asked them to do. Like, people have been saying for years, we need to do this, we need to do this. Now they're saying we're going to do this. Now they're talking about planning and what it's going to look like moving forward. So for me at this point, there's not necessarily a reason to distrust them. I know a lot of people would love the video game. I'm not a big video game guy, so it is what it is. But I think some of those group deals that would be done would probably be some of the hardest ones, just because, you know, Ohio State probably has a little bit of a different value than, you know, the Citadel, right? And then you've got 120 guys potentially on each roster that you would have to deal with one way or another. And, you know, do they all make the same amount of money? Do they not? And I think they just want to avoid that headache.
So we have just about 2 minutes left. And, you know, we always try to end it on that up note of helping people know what to do if they find themselves in a similar situation. So let's say I'm the mother of an incoming freshman to a university. He's been recruited, or, you know, they're going to be competing as a student athlete, and I know this is coming. And I think my child has the potential to make something, to be compensated for their likeness in some way and make money off their image. What do I do to be prepared? What's your best piece of advice that you would give me and my child before we embark on this adventure? Courtney, you want to start us?
Well, if you're still in the recruiting process, drill down with every single school and ask what their plan is, and more importantly, what their resources are, and exactly what they see as important and what they're going to help with education with your child. I think, you know, that's going to be an enormous difference maker. And everybody keeps talking about the potential for, you know, sham deals with boosters coming in and offering money and all that other stuff. You know, that is what it is. And there's going to be guardrails to hopefully prevent that. You know, forget that noise. What are you doing to help my kid?
Joshua, what would you tell the incoming freshman?
Well, I'd want to walk it back a little bit further than that. If you see your child is in Little League and you know, they're big and they're excelling, mom and dad, I would get a Dave Ramsey class or something like that. And I would build my own personal financial habits, just so my children can see what a good financial house looks like, and they can learn from just watching those habits. I think that's huge for kids. But then moving forward, I agree with everything Courtney said. I think in parents of children who are getting recruited, regardless of whether they would make a ton of money or not, you need to ask the hard questions to the coaches. You need to figure out if the academic programs are a fit for them. You need to figure out if the campus culture is a fit. You need to figure out if the locker room is a fit. You need to figure out what resources, what nutrition, you know, the weight training, all those different things. It all matters. And when your child is that young, you have to be the advocate. So it doesn't matter if they think that you're an a-hole, or they think you ask too many questions, or they think you worry about this, that, and the third. You need to make sure that you can support your child as best as possible. So Courtney hit the nail on the head. Anything that you can do to nail down what resources exist and how they can be applied to help your child, that's exactly what you have to do.
Luke, bring us home.
Yeah, I mean, I think they both hit it on the head, right? Which is questions, questions, questions. You have got to ask questions. And I share with my clients all the time, like, your advisors, all of your advisors, whether it's going to be a coach, whether it's player development, whether it's compliance, whether it's a marketing agent, a lawyer, myself, what have you, you should be able to ask questions and get an answer in a way that you understand. Because that's one of the hardest things, is that you know, oftentimes we can have parents that will ask questions and they don't really necessarily understand the response, so that they feel uncomfortable asking a follow-up. And I think that's the key thing that we have to drive home, is that, you know, people in these positions are going to have to be able to answer the questions in a way that the student athlete and that the parents can understand, that they can digest, and they can make an informed decision based on that. So ultimately, you know, thinking about, you know, all from the schools and the recruiting process and all that kind of stuff, asking and drilling in on those questions. But then the other piece too is to say, at a certain point, am I making sure that I'm getting the independent, qualified advice that I should be getting? And if that means seeking that advice elsewhere, going to a third party to, you know, who deals with that, to be able to ask those questions, to get that understanding, sometimes that may be important to be a part of the decision-making process.
No question.
The last thing I'll say, don't sign anything. That's one, I mean, listen, do not sign anything until you fully understand what it says.
Amen.
Well, I wish we could give a round of applause for this incredible panel and for this incredible series that we have been privileged to be part of. I thank all three of you for, Luke, you especially, for bringing this together with us and partnering. Joshua and Courtney, we couldn't have ended with a better team. So thank you. Please remember that Sports and Society will continue our huddles, which will continue this Thursday with Trevon Logan, talking about what exactly is the value of a high-level recruit and how that's quantified at the collegiate level, and that's research that he's done that's really revolutionary in nature. The following week, we will be talking about what happens when colleges eliminate their sports or colleges are eliminated altogether. What happens to the student athlete in that case? And then we'll be bringing home this series just for a little bit of a break with Katie Smith on June 11th, and we hope that you'll join us. Please go to sportsandsociety.osu.edu for a complete list of all our activities. We are thrilled that you could join us, and we hope that you stay well and have a wonderful day. Thanks to all of you, and we will hopefully see you soon.